Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, or wherever you are in the world. Thank you for your time today, where I'm going to talk about enabling SQL access to your OpenEdge application. And I'm going to talk about a component that's available from Progress software called OpenAccess, and it helps you build a custom ODBC, JDBC, ADO.NET, and ODBC driver for your OpenEdge application. So my name is Connor, and I'm a member of the Progress.
To unmute your line, press *6
so OpenAccess
or #6.
Brings many benefits to OpenEdge. First of all, it allows you to build a standards-based SQL access layer to your application. And a key point here is that it is an SDK, so this is something that will require you to write a little bit of code yourself. But once you've written that little bit of code, you can access then your OpenEdge database in an appropriate way. There's a little bit of feedback on the line, so if anyone is not on mute, could you mute yourself, please? And a common solution that OpenAccess can bring is to enable your data to be displayed in a modern business intelligence tool, such as Tableau or even Microsoft's Excel, to produce graphical reports and in business intelligence reports to underlying OpenEdge data. Sometimes the OpenEdge database will have been designed with performance in mind, as opposed to presenting data in an intuitive and natural-to-use way for someone like a business analyst who's trying to gain insight into the data. So using OpenAccess, you can provide a view of your OpenEdge world in exactly the form that the business analyst requires. They don't need to navigate to your underlying tables. They get a view of the data that is in exactly the format that they need. Now, as well as that, you also get to incorporate your OpenEdge logic and your ABL code, your 4GL code in the code. So you can manipulate your data using your pre-existing procedures to return the data in a form that's appropriate to the caller. It also doesn't bypass, as many other solutions do, the actual underlying security mechanism of the OpenEdge system. So it can use the system, and the user will only get access to the data which is appropriate to them under their credentials. And obviously, it also takes into account all the good features of OpenEdge, such as multi-tenancy and so forth. So it's all about providing a view of your OpenEdge world to an external system that is appropriate to that system. And the use case we'll examine right now in this session today is for using it to a reporting tool, such as a business intelligence tool. Now, as well as that, if you're interested in the cloud, OpenAccess can help you make that journey to making your data accessible on the cloud using the DataDirect Cloud component from Progress software. So I won't speak at all to that today, but just bear in mind that when you build a solution with OpenAccess, you're also bringing yourself a long way towards completing the journey of enabling cloud access, if that's also on your roadmap for your application. So this is a diagram that shows a quick overview of what the OpenAccess SDK is. And effectively, what it lets you do is create a database driver, whether that driver be implemented and exposed as ODBC for Microsoft applications or the Windows world, or JDBC for the Java-focused world, or else ODBC or .NET. All of those, by implementing OpenAccess once, you get to access your data from all of those common standards. Now, it provides you with about 95% of all the work, but it does require you to implement one class. So in the diagram on the right-hand side of the slide, you can see three things. At the very bottom is the data source. That's the OpenEdge database and potentially your ABL code or 4GL code. There's also the OpenAccess SDK in blue at the top. That's what you get. That's the 95% that is implemented for you, and it provides the connections to the standards, as you can see, ODBC, JDBC, ADO.NET, and ODBC. And OpenAccess SDK then mediates calls from the external world to your database through what is a class that you implement yourself. Now, in the terminology of OpenAccess, that's called the IP, or the interface provider. That is a simple class that you implement, and you can only write a few lines of code to complete a database driver. So it's very little effort, very little development time. Typically, you can get something up and running in a day, you can get something actually deployed within a couple of weeks, and by implementing that single class in green, the IP. Now, you have a choice of languages. You can choose to implement that in C, C++, Java, or .NET in your language of choice. And your class that you implement is essentially tasked with interfacing to the OpenEdge database. So we're going to show you how to do that in a few moments. I want to contrast what OpenAccess provides you with what an out-of-the-box or standard ODBC or JDBC driver will get you. So on the left-hand side, you can see what you get for standard with an ODBC driver. So a business intelligence tool will connect to your database via the driver, but it's connecting directly to the underlying DB. So it's viewing the database tables as they were written, potentially many years ago, and with no concern at all shown for presenting the data in a format that's easily consumable by a business analyst or the person who's using the tool. It also bypasses any logic or 4GL code, and it also bypasses any security mechanism. So these concerns are addressed by the OpenAccess driver on the right-hand side, because effectively we can go to our application server and log into that under our own credentials, authorize ourselves to make sure we get the right data, and also get the data from multiple tables if we want, or create some custom code to go and manipulate the data before we return it to our caller. In more detail, there are actually two ways to implement architecturally the driver. The one I'll show you today is the most basic one, which is a row-based architecture, whereby the code you write is simply tasked with calling a row in your database. But bear in mind that there's also the SQL pass-through architecture, whereby you need to write a little bit more code, but you get far more control over the query and how you implement that call. So you can provide a lot more optimization, you can do smart things with joins, you can do caching and so forth. You can effectively do more, have more control with the pass-through architecture. Note also that OpenAccess has been deployed for many, many years, and it's in production in some very high-scale and highly performant environments. So it is possible to implement this in a way that is extremely performant and can access. Because you have full control, you can really optimize it to provide the performance that you require. Okay, so a very frequent demand that we're faced with as OpenEdge users and the people who run OpenEdge systems is that users are demanding a clearer view of their data. The data is there, it's secure, it works, it's fast, but we want to be able to produce reports that are more intelligent and let us discover gems of information that we can help optimize our business. So there's a lot of frustration around that from some users because they perceive that the tables in OpenEdge don't give them what they want to see. So in this very simple example, I'm going to take the well-known sports database from the OpenEdge world and ask the question that a typical business analyst may ask. That is, I want to see where in the world my orders are going. So the database consists of a series of tables that track where sports equipment is being shipped around the world. But the existing out-of-the-box driver will get access to the underlying tables with no concern for security or the actual form of the data. So somebody who's a business user doesn't really care about things like database schema or anything like that. That's not their problem. They only perceive it as being an issue that they just want to see the orders and the countries that those orders are being shipped to. So from their perspective, in their world, that should be a very simple problem. But as we know, that data may well be actually sourced in multiple tables inside of our system, and the table names and the vocabulary used in those tables may well not be reflective of the actual reality today. And we may want also to authenticate ourselves at those tables and also to run some actual logic. So whereas the customer, the user perceives it as I just want to get access to my data, in reality, we need to go and provide that in a view that's appropriate to that user. So OpenAccess is the component that will let us do that. So on the demo that I'm going to show you, we have two sides. One is typically the corporate server. This is where your OpenEdge database will be installed and is running. And also we have the laptop, or the desktop, which is the computer being used by the business analyst or the person who wants to run the report. Now we have our standard sports database. And on that database, there are two tables. One is the order table, and the second is the customer table. Now, the data we're trying to return to our end user is really the leftmost column from the order table, along with the rightmost column from the country table, the customer table, which is the country column. So what they really want to see is just the orders and the countries. They don't want to see complicated tables, to their mind anyway, they're complicated, containing lots of superfluous data, such as carriers, sales reps, and so forth. that just complicates their view of the world. All they want to see is a simple table with a customer and a country. And in our example, we're going to go and write a little bit of logic that will simply call into those two tables, get the data, and return it to the end user. Now, bear in mind that this is just proving the concept. It's a very, very simple example. It's really just a toy implementation, but it does prove the actual functionality of how easy it is to create a database driver using OpenAccess that exposes just what the user wants to see. So we're going to go look at those two tables, and we're going to write a little bit of code that we're going to pop into our OpenEdge app server, which is going to be fronted then by a interface provider. That's the class that I mentioned earlier on that goes and implements your interface to your database and your logic. And that will then be put into the OpenAccess server side. Now that's the 95% of the system that's already provided for you. So we're just providing a little bit in the custom access IP. Then on the client side, now in my demo I'll show it on the same machine just for convenience, but bear in mind that this could be anywhere in the world that can access that server. So it could be, typically it'll be somewhere else on the network. We're going to use an ODBC client to access our data and run a report to build a pretty graph or a pretty map that shows where our orders are going in the world. And we'll use a business intelligence tool. In this case, I'll use a tool that's effectively is Tableau, well-known BI tool, to access that data. And if we have time, I may also access that data from a separate client just to show that it's used. So I'm going to use the OpenAccess SDK. I'm going to write a little bit of code in ABL called getOrderCountry. That's some logic that calls to the backend tables and returns the data in the format that the user wants to see. I'm going to go show you a single Java class, which is an implementation of our interface provider class. That's the 5% that we need to implement ourselves. But I hope you'll see when we see the code that it's very, very simple and it doesn't really take much time at all to do that. Okay? That's our architecture. And once you provide the data in a format that's suitable for our end user, they get to see if they want, and we have happy users, which is what we always want to see. Okay? So I'll pause there for 1 second and ask if there's any questions for now from the group. Okay, well, assuming not, I'll move on. Then in this, I'm moving now to a machine that has the OpenAccess software installed. Incidentally, before I do that, if you do wish to go and take a look at the OpenAccess software, it's available for free evaluation download from the Progress website. So just go to this page here, and you can download the actual software. You get a number of days or weeks. So it's all available. Everything I show you here today can be replicated on your own system very quickly. Okay, but I've already installed the software on this server machine. And so when you install the software, typically you'll install one side on the server and one side on the client. But really on this I've got both, so I've got both the server side and the client side here on the same box. And really you get pretty straightforwardly, you get access to the management console. This is what I get here. And on the client side, it adds on a database connection to the standard Windows ODBC administrator. So it fits in with the existing Windows management functionality of both the client side and the server side. Just quickly orienting ourselves then inside of my OpenEdge system here, I've got the Sports 2000 database, and I've got the standard app server, which are already running. Okay, so to install and get up and running on OpenAccess, all I really did was simply run the installer. I accepted all the defaults. It's really quite straightforward. I'm going to access that now. It's going to need to type in password. And you can see that this fits into the standard snap-in for Windows management. And I can see that there are a number of services here. All that's active is the Java and the main OpenAccess SDK agent. Everything else I haven't switched off. Because I've chosen to implement my class in Java, I need to have the actual Java side active. That's running, and it has an actual configuration for Sports 2000 in here, but we'll look at more of that later on. On the client side, I just simply ran the installer, and all I needed to do was to add a single connection. So to that server, I choose the OpenAccess SDK, and that brings up a very simple wizard. I simply typed in an actual port and a host name. Now, because it's on the same machine, I'm using localhost. This could be any machine anywhere on the network. I can choose and navigate to the actual sports feed. So I've configured that already, so I could add in more if I want. This here is the actual connection to the sports database. But it doesn't connect directly to the sports database. It connects via my own code using OpenAccess. So as we'll see, when we connect to it, it's going to give us what we want to see as opposed to the underlying database tables. And then we'll start the Progress Analyst Studio, which is actually effectively Tableau. I choose Connected Data. I can choose the ODBC database. And from there, I can choose the DSN, which was configured for me earlier on. Now, when I connect to this, I can see that I have the choice to log in under a particular username if I want to. But there's a table that's been exposed to me called Order Country. Now, this is exactly what I want to see as a business analyst. I don't want to see any other tables. I just want to see one table that's very simple. It tells me I can connect live to the database. And here I see inside of my business analyst tool, I get a country and the order number. That's exactly what I asked for. So I can drop this over here. See, I'm getting back countries. I'm going to get a little bit of smart to tell that this is the country, and I can take the number of records for the order number. I'll drop that in here. And straight away, that's giving me exactly what I want to see. And from there, I can go and do all kinds of nice graphical representations of the data, even create myself a map. I can see it color-coded. The more orders have been shipped to a country, the darker the country is. And I can then start to put in labels, groups like that. So as a business analyst, I've been presented with exactly the data I want to see. I didn't need to navigate to lots of tables. I didn't need to know anything about OpenEdge, frankly, or any ABL code. But the data has been presented to me in a very intuitive format. And I use OpenAccess to provide that. Similarly, just to prove it, since we have a few moments, I'm going to open up now OpenOffice, which is a standard Office suite. And the only reason I'm showing this is because it also has a ODBC connection with it. So I can simply choose ODBC here. I can select to the same ports CSN that I had before, accept all the rest of the defaults, save the file, save it. And now inside of my OpenOffice database, I can see the order country table, which I had created for me. And when I click on that, I can see the data being returned is not a complex sequence of tables. It's just the order and the country from the sports database that order was shipped to. So very, very simple. So we've made our end user happy, and we've achieved that, hopefully you'll see in a very simple way. So let's look into more detail now, how we actually did that. So going into my development environment, I can now see that as I mentioned from the slide at the beginning, I wrote a very simple ABL routine, procedure, to go and return a number, the country, I need to say, for the order number. And inside here, I have a few little lines of code to go and get that back. Now, this is not exactly a real application. This is a very, very simple call. But it does prove the concept that you can write any logic you want in your ABL to get the data from any number of tables and to change it by calling any number of procedures or writing your own ABL code to go and manipulate it into exactly the format the end user requires. Okay? So that's been written and deployed to the App Store. I also, as I mentioned, wrote a single class. And in fact, it was even more simple than that. I was able to use a template class and just implement two methods on that class. So this is the actual Java class, which implements the interface provider for the sports database. And as we'll see, it uses the Java Open Client component from OpenEdge to call our app server code. As we go through it, it's very simple. We make a new connection to the app server. That's a little bit of open client code. And then inside then of the execute call, which is a method that we implement in return for the call coming in from the business intelligence tool, it's select call, and page down to the call where we call into our procedure, which is here. So here's running the procedure on the app server. So very simply, there are many examples that are much more complete and much more robust than this simple implementation. But as a very simple example, it lets you go and run a procedure on your app server, which in turn goes and calls your database tables. Now, there was one other step that was required, which is a very simple registration of that. So I need to tell the OpenAccess system where my sports connection has been registered. So inside of here, you'll see a number of services. And I have data source settings down here. So effectively, I simply created a new data source. I go new data source. I can create one more now. Called temp sports. And inside there, you simply need to change this to go and point towards the actual Java class which you just created. IP class. And here's where you would give the actual fully qualified path name to the actual class that we write. That's where you place it there. And for what I've registered earlier on, you see here it is. The parameters. There is the fully qualified path name to the same class name that I showed you a few moments ago inside of the development environment. That's it. And then I also simply need to also give it pointed towards the schema path, which is just a couple of text files that define the table, which we have actually created as well. Okay. So really, from end to end, what we have here, if you look at it from an architectural perspective, I have my OpenEdge database, which is running on my server. I have created a very simple class in Java, which runs a .p procedure in ABL, which queries that database table. I can do anything I like. It's completely flexible. I've got full control both over the Java side and over my own ABL code, which is then registered in this management console to point towards it, which then from any client, anywhere on our network, I can access from any business intelligence tool. So when I connect to the data, I connect again using the OpenAccess, the Tableau. I choose that CSN connection. I connect to it. I can choose to log in under whatever user I like. And then choose the table. It's presented to me in exactly the format that I need. Connect live to it. There's no caching of information here. I'm accessing live data. And when I drag it in here, I'm getting access to exactly the data that I require, which lets me create kind of nice graphical reporting that lets me demonstrate the power of my application to external users. Okay, so we have about 9 minutes left. So at that point, I'll hand control back to Jean-Michel. And if there are any questions about what we've just done,
Okay. Can everybody hear me?
I can hear you.
Good. Thanks a lot, Connor, for this very straightforward presentation. Any questions for Connor? The microphones are open, so please feel free to. We still have a few minutes where we can discuss, chat. In the chat window, I've also been providing 2 links to the product where you can have access to the product and the download a version of that product as well, just in case. No questions? Okay. Anything else?
I can hear a dog somewhere in the background. He's barking, so somebody has a question.
Yeah. Your dog can do SQL as well?
Yes, not quite as good as some, but yeah, he's handy enough.
Okay. Last chance to ask questions. Then, if we don't have any questions, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us on this webinar. We will try to make it available through the community and within the next 5 days. If everything goes well, it will be available tomorrow. I wish everyone a very pleasant day. And again, thanks a lot, Connor, for this very quick and straightforward presentation. Very much appreciated.
You're welcome. Thanks, guys. Thank you for your time.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.